of Ash and Flo. This is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around to listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
Welcome, everybody, to this new episode of the Unbillable Hours podcast. Frankly, one I'm quite excited about because we have Neelima Mahajan with us. She is the editor-in-chief of ThinkHack magazine. That is the business magazine of Roland Berger, for those of you who don't know it. And I'm excited because, to be honest, Neelima, I've always been impressed with the magazine. So we are very happy to have you on to discuss, essentially, how do you build something like that? What is the role of a magazine effort like this in professional services marketing, and everything you have to say to that?
Thank you, Flo. Thank you, Ash, for inviting me to this. I think this magazine is truly, truly special. I worked on several publications in my career, and mostly as a proper business journalist, so legitimate business magazines. I worked for about 10 years in different publications in India, including Forbes magazine, where I was part of the launch team.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I went to University of California in Berkeley as a visiting scholar. It was sort of my sabbatical, where I wanted to take time off and, explore something different. And that was great, because it opened my eyes to, different ways of storytelling, experiencing the story and then telling it. So it was, all in all, it was a very exciting year. But it was also the year that marked my transition from traditional business journalism to what we call corporate journalism.
Okay.
Because when I finished my program at Berkeley, I was faced with either just come back to India and do the same things that I'd been doing before. So work for a new publication or some of the old ones I had been working with, and basically do the same thing I'd been doing for 10 years, maybe with, a better designation, but practically the same work, the same market, the same companies you're writing about, the same people you're meeting. And that, to me, at that point, wasn't that exciting. And I wanted to explore more. And as I was looking at my options, I thought that maybe going to China might be. And why was that? Because when I was part of Forbes magazine in India, they commissioned me to work on a special report on doing business in China from a very Indian angle. So I was really intrigued by Chinese companies, the Chinese culture, corporate culture. And I had done all of this from a distance. And to me, that wasn't that real. And I wanted to know more. And I knew that going to China on a press visa was going to be problematic. So I didn't even try that route. I knew that there were 2 business schools in China, which were, globally focused, and they really worked in English and worked in a lot of international markets. And I decided, let me try that out. So I wrote to one of them and said, I'm so-and-so, and I'm looking at what I want to do next. Would you be open to the idea of me coming there and setting up a business magazine for you? And I was surprised at the speed of response. They responded almost immediately. I had, my interviews with everyone over the next 2 weeks, and I had an offer letter.
Oh, so you pitched them on the idea to create a business publication for the university?
Yeah, I did. And then I landed up there. So this was December and January, and I landed up there in March. And if they could, they would have had me there sooner. But, I had to wrap up my affairs in the US, come back to India, get a work visa, and then go. But for me, that was the first time I set something up from the ground up. And it was a very, very interesting experience, full of learnings, very exciting, because literally, it was an open field, just pick something up, make it work. The interesting thing about that publication was I was sitting there in Beijing, and I'm supposed to get this off the ground. And it has to be in English, it has to be really good, and it has to cater to an audience outside of China.
Mm-hmm.
So people in Europe, people in the US, because those were some of the key markets for the school's programs. And it was sometimes frustrating trying to make this happen because, we are in China. There are political sensitivities to things we are working on. So you have to be very, very careful about how you approach things. So that was a big problem. So either
Was it just you then in the beginning? It was just you doing the...
It was just me in the beginning, but
Okay.
of course, I collaborated with an external agency to do the actual production. But there was a serious problem in terms of writers. The writers you get, they are very good at their stuff. If they understand business, maybe they can't write English that well. Or if they write English really well, maybe they don't have that understanding of business. That's the kind, the kind that you're looking for. So it was a struggle to get it off the ground. And then there's this pushback on what is good content and what is not. And I fought it. I tried to explain to them, I think the thing that really works well is you bring the good old-fashioned values of journalism to this arena, really.
Yeah.
And that's what we tried to do. We tried to create a magazine that was truly journalistic. We would commission writers and they would report on stories in a truly, truly journalistic manner. We would interview global thought leaders as well for that magazine, which was, small and at that time pretty inconsequential. But as we started doing this, everyone got used to the idea that, this is how this thing has to run. And what really helped us was we got some really, really great feedback early on. So among the people who used to receive the magazine were people like the then global CEO of HSBC and Jaguar Land Rover. And some of them used to write to us saying, oh, this is great. We picked it up, not expecting much. And, we were surprised to see the content. And what you're trying to do is really, really great. So over time, they warmed up to the idea of having the product the way it was. And we also didn't leave any stone unturned in trying to pursue literally, every interesting company in China, every MNC that was working in China, every big global thought leader, because we felt that, all of that added to make the magazine, something really great. So that's how I really started in this corporate journalism mode. I was also at that time responsible for distributing the magazine, which was kind of interesting because you're doing it in
Can I ask how was that done? What was the distribution? Was that a print edition or was that...
It was print. It was print, as well as we had a presence online. And now if you were to look it up now, it's changed. It's quite different now from the time that I was there. So everything's changed. But it was primarily print, and we expanded the printing locations from just Shanghai to also New York. And we acquired an ISSN number, which we thought was sort of important. We tried distributing it in different innovative ways. So, I personally reached out to 5-star hotels in Beijing and Shanghai, where I knew that business readers would come and stay. And I would tell them that if you give us an ad and we'll run the ad, and would you, distribute 900 copies for us?
Interesting approach. Yeah. I like it.
Every time they would look at it and they would say, okay, first we need to really examine the magazine and see, there's nothing that we don't like in it, and they would do it. So we got into a number of these tie-ups, and we used that as one way of distributing, apart from our regular distribution via our own. We did a small amount of airport distribution. So we got into some business lounges, which was a bit complicated because in China, if you try and do that, you need to send the publication to the Civil Aviation Ministry. But
so if you can do it in China, you can officially do it anywhere.
Well, back then, it was, for me, it was this great opportunity where you could just innovate, pick up the product, innovate, do what you want. So externally, we worked with an agency, but we also had this question of a website and how to make it work. And because it's a website, you can't wait for, we had 4 magazines a year. So you can't wait for the 3-month cycle to start putting content online, which I feel is, sometimes it's just too long. I think you need to hit your readers much often. So now the question came, how do we generate content for the website? And for that, we worked with freelancers. It will just get them to, work on stories we felt were important. Some of them were China-centric, and some of them were more what you would call management-related. So, for instance, back then in China, companies were just growing like crazy. So you meet a company and the CEO would tell you, oh, we are growing 4,000%. So for me, coming from India, which was a much, much slower business environment, this was, eye-opening, even mind-boggling. And so we would commission, different stories, like we did a series on hypergrowth and how to manage it. So yeah, we did a mixed bag of stuff. And at some level, we felt we need to do more. So we started working with interns. We would hire basically people who were translation majors and not really economics or business experts. And I would sort of teach them on the job. And they started interviewing, they started doing all kinds of things, So we built our own digital studio in-house, and then we hired someone to look after that. For a period of time, we had our own in-house designer, also an intern who didn't speak a word of English and somehow landed up at our office, but we really liked him, so we made it work. So over time, we built this franchise, and at some point, the question came that, okay, the content is good. What more can we do with it? And it wasn't enough to put it on our website because people weren't really coming to the website for the content. They were coming to the website for programs, MBAs. And also, our target audience was outside of China. So you're doing this sitting in China for an audience you will never see or meet. And the solution to that we found was we reached out to different magazines and newspapers, and we got into sort of content republishing.
The syndicated elsewhere.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
We didn't pay for any of that.
But I think this is a problem we're all very familiar with, which is if you have great content, sometimes the company's or the firm's website is the sorry for that, but the worst place to put it because there's not that much traffic. So I've in the past always advocated for, if you want your own thing, put it, for example, on Medium or other like publishing platforms. What would be your view on that? Do you have one? Or
I know a bit about this because we tried it. We didn't try Medium. Medium is a bit hit or miss again, because I think there's a question of discoverability. How will you be discovered on Medium? It's become a bit of how do I put it? A bit of a hodgepodge.
It's trickier now, especially in Europe. It used to be that you can, for example, draw your social following onto the platform if they were there, but with GDPR regulation in Europe, that's mostly gone. So that has come down for a bit. I haven't tried it recently, but it used to be that for me. It used to work quite well for a bit. In the past, it's not that easy anymore. Yeah, that's right.
So we never ever tried Medium. What we did was we went with very, very well-known brands. So we went with Forbes in the US, where we had our own dedicated blog online, which was not a blog, but it was basically our stories, just, repurposed a little bit, because, you can't just pick up a story and publish it as is on their website, but repurposed a little, and there would always be backlinks here and there. There would always be a credit line at the bottom saying this was originally published here. So we did that with a number of media. We did it with Forbes very regularly. We did it with Forbes in India as well, with Fortune in China, South China Morning Post, which is Hong Kong's most important English language newspaper. we did a couple of one-off pieces with Nikkei in Japan and Dong Business Review in Korea, which is sort of the Harvard Business Review of Korea. And we had to take different approaches with all of them because all of them were interested in different kinds of content. So I remember we'd done something with the Economist executive briefing, and they were more interested in content that would help an executive do whatever they're doing better. So over there, it was very easy to push something which was coming more from the academic side, which was less about, our own journalistic efforts, but something that our professor had done. So that kind of approach worked for them. For Forbes, it was always about, they wanted more original stuff about China. Similarly, South China Morning Post, Fortune China was interested in a certain kind of column. So we had to, vary our approach. Yeah. But it did lead to a rise in traffic, because there would be people who linked back and saw what we were doing. They would subscribe to the newsletter, and sort of, it's a constant effort. So you can't say, you pick one strategy and that will work, but you have to try all kinds of different things.
If I can go back to two things you said there, I think stand out to me as interesting. So at the beginning, you spoke about how you personally almost broke out of just business journalism and did, I'm going to say, other forms of reporting or maybe other forms of storytelling as well. Would you say that is something that goes into a successful corporate magazine as well? So not just the business reporting, I'm not going to say standard fare, but sort of being even a bit more sort of coffee table. I don't know what the right word is, but not just the pure business stuff.
Yeah, so I do think here ThinkAct is a great example. And I will not take full credit for that, because before me, there were others working on it. And a big contribution comes from design. ThinkAct is a very, very special brand. I think out of all the publications I've worked at, this one is truly outstanding. And this is because of a mix of things. One, we like to call it a coffee table business magazine. That's that's how we like to think about it. That's what guides our philosophy of what gets in there, what doesn't. So when we work on it, I think there are a couple of things. It needs to be at a very high level, very, very high. So from how we choose the themes to, how we package everything together, how we design it, the kind of people who write it, the people featured in it, the people designing it, everything has to be special in some way, which is, I think, very rare also in your regular business magazines. I think everyone in the business of making magazines is too caught up in, putting together this bucket of content and just throwing it out.
And it almost, for the people, I don't know if there's people listening who don't know the magazine, but for those who don't know, you have issue magazines, right? That's one issue that makes the cover, and then there is like almost like an individual design concept that flows through one issue, and then the next issue gets it's a different thing, which I think, going back to the points you made about your creative experiments about distribution at your earlier magazine, that definitely helps, right? If you want to associate with other brands, and if you want to be, for example, if you want to distribute at 5-star hotels, and your magazine then just looks like it has a firm branded cover and some stock photo stuff, like that's not gonna fly, right?
I think stock photos on the cover are just lazy. I mean,
lazy or a budget question. I mean,
I would say budget.
I mean, in China, I didn't have a big budget. And sometimes we had to work with stock photos, but we had to repurpose them, do some things of our own. I remember one particular night where the cover was just not working, and the cover was designed by the agency. And I had this design intern whose name, by the way, English name was Snake. So, and he came to me and said, what are you doing in the office this late? And I said, my cover is not working. And he said, give it to me and tell me what you want to do. And we had it done by an intern. So I think it's not always a question of budget, but it's a question sometimes of creativity.
And someone, I mean, apparently, Mr. Snake here had the like. You have to. It's I keep telling that to, in my case, clients who want to drive these kinds of efforts. You can outsource some of it, but you always have to have someone in house who not only knows their stuff in terms of this case design or journalism, but who also I don't know how to phrase it, but cares enough, right? to say
Yeah.
to not say, okay, here it is, fine, sign off and produce it, but to say, nah, what you just said there, it doesn't really work. It's not up to whatever the standard is we're trying to hit, right? That you can't outsource that because
Yeah, I think it's very important to have someone who's already done the legwork in journalism. So I mean, I started on the desk, which back then, for me it wasn't my ideal job, doing magazine production, working late nights, but that's how I started.
the news is the news desk, you mean, for people, right?
Yeah, the news desk, production desk, commissioning, illustrations, editing stuff, that was my first job. But in hindsight, I feel like much as I hated it back then, because, I was coming home at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., working for a business weekly. It was a constant cycle every week, so late nights every week, and I hated it. But I think doing that gives you a certain sensibility in terms of editing, of course. What makes a good headline? What are the different elements you need in a story? Yeah. What is a good story? Which one is not? It gives you a certain sense of judgment.
I'd also argue that it gives you the view of what you're doing as a product. You put a product together, which I used to make this, or still make it sometimes today. If I see stuff come in, articles, blog posts, whatever, I would turn around to my team and ask them, would you pay $7 for this at a newsstand? And then sometimes they would look at me and say, what? No. And I call this the kiosk test. And I said, if it's not so good that you'd pay for it to read it, we should probably not publish it because we're just going to waste it. Like, the fact that you're giving it away for free as part of a content marketing effort doesn't mean that you get to waste people's time. Like that is, I mean, I always struggled with this because you said it, you talk about content quality and how to get it. I always found that so hard to operationalize. It's easy if you talk to journalists or people who know their stuff. If you talk to people who don't do that, I always struggle with explaining to them that something is not good enough. I don't know.
So Flo, I'd just like to interject there because one of the big moves that's happening in professional services that I'm seeing anyway, is that while there have always been journalists being hired as marketers to like do the content marketing and everything, now there's this entire push. I've seen a number of companies to get their marketing teams and their content teams to be in-house journalists, which is a really tricky aspect because it's either people do not have a journalistic background or people who have the background don't really know how to write corporate stuff, which is why I wanted to ask you, Neelima, about how is the transition into corporate journalism? Because a lot of people are on that journey actually right now, and they would love to understand that a bit more. And then there's also, like you said, Flo, in terms of like the content thing, I believe that test aspect is valid and it's okay, but it's mostly about like how do you think like the journalist? How do you get that
it's quality
story
subjective, right? So that's what makes it difficult. But that doesn't mean that you can't have some standard you should try to hit. I don't know. I'm Neelima, you're the expert.
But Neelima, I'd like to get that view from you about this corporate journalism aspect.
Yeah, for me, it was, I think, a little different because I didn't come into something that was already existing, but I had the freedom to set it up. So again, I'm talking of China here, not so much Think Act. So when you do that and you come in as the expert, and I was very lucky to have a boss who, after the first few months started seeing what I was trying to do and he just backed me up like anything. So what I ended up doing was, come in with what I knew best, approaching every story like a journalistic story. And I think it paid off, as opposed to the other schools that were doing, basically just repurposing academic research, and all in-house research, nothing from outside.
Yeah.
What we ended up creating was, at that time, a truly China-focused business magazine that anyone who was interested in China would want to read. And that also happened because we kept the school, even though the brand was on the masthead, but we didn't really, make it about us. In the initial days, I always had these strange, such as, oh, we had an event with the House of Lords in the UK, and here are the pictures. Why don't you publish them? And I had to push back and say, no, our reader does not want that. If this is an alumni magazine, please put it there, but
Who
not
besides
in this
ourselves
magazine.
cares about that? Yeah.
Yeah, no one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares about your events. No one cares about, you standing next to Henry Kissinger. I even received that picture at some point. No one cares. All they want to know is, if you are giving me something that I'm going to invest my time in, how is it useful for me? Does it solve any problem for me? And that's always been something we've tried to do, is always question the themes and the content from that perspective, keeping in mind the reader, which is, well, we like to think of the reader group as senior executives, and think about what things are they thinking about, what keeps them awake at night. Can we give something from that perspective? So yeah, I think for me it was a bit different. If I had come into a place where there was already a system and a structure, I'm pretty sure I would have had to leave this approach and create and just go with the flow.
And then you would have been the internal journalist reporting on the event and with the House of Lords in Britain, because that's often, I think, to Ash's point, that's where it often ends up, is the corporate journalists sort of do reporting on stuff that is not super relevant to the audience. Yeah.
I mean, we were there at all, but we were never really reporting on the event. But every time we had someone important coming there, we would take them aside, make a video or an interview.
You would have interviewed Henry Kissinger, to your example.
No, he didn't come there. So
yes,
one of our,
I know, but if you had a chance,
our deans had gone there. Yeah, we would have if we had. I mean, being a very elite business school in China, we always had all these kinds of guests come in. So we've had Sheryl Sandberg, for instance. We had all the top academics as well as CEOs, CXOs coming in. So we were lucky in that regard. We could make use of those opportunities, but we were always very clear that this is a journalistic effort. So don't expect us to, write something about the school.
No. And I think you can see a lot of these principles still at work at the place where you're working now.
Yeah.
Do you have, I mean, maybe to Ash's point, do you have any learnings in recent years? You've been doing this for a long while.
10 years now. 10 years on the other side.
Yeah. Do you have any recent learnings you think might be worth sharing about just doing what you do, but in these successfully in these times we have now? Is there anything, has something changed or anything to that end?
Well, I think it all boils down to, you just have to get the basics right. Old-fashioned journalism. I think, whatever everyone might say, you do stuff on digital, you do, videos, you do sliders, you do, all kinds of stuff. They are nice, but the backbone is still good old-fashioned journalism. So I think the basic principles haven't changed. The way we think about our next themes, that hasn't changed.
And what I like about your magazine and this one here is this idea of providing interesting perspectives, like you said, not just from the consulting firm, but from other people as well around the topic. But then not sort of, consultants always do this, and I'm guilty of this. They frame the issue. They frame the issue for you. Yeah.
Our partners are not in the magazine.
No, I get that. But you have. I mean, I read the piece where you interviewed Clayton Christensen, so it's not Roland Berger telling me how to think about something. It's you are interviewing him briefly before he passed away, unfortunately, right? It was surprising.
A year before.
A year before. But I think that's a recipe for success, or it's more interesting to me as a reader. That's how I should say it, than any consulting firm giving me this very narrow, we already framed the problem for you thing, which I think that is a lot of thought leadership, is that it's providing one point of view, one single point of view on an issue, and I can either buy that and find it interesting, or I can say, I don't care, then there's nothing else for me. So I think there's this variation of perspectives, and I, as a reader, get a chance to make up my own mind based on the information you presented, as opposed to consulting firm saying, here is how you should think about optimizing your supply chain in 2022.
Yeah, at some level, I think it's also about the themes you choose. So mostly, and I say mostly because sometimes we do deviate from this, but mostly we'll be doing themes like, I don't know if you saw this, but this is about how the end of predictability.
That's the most recent one, isn't it?
No, this is the one before the most recent
Okay,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I've seen that.
So how do you make sense of this new world, and then you break it into different parts. So I think as a magazine, ThinkAct operates at a higher level in terms of themes and content.
Yeah.
We try not to get too industry specific. We wouldn't normally do a magazine on one industry and here's everything we want to tell you about it, because then you start alienating the other people from, let's say, automotive or whatever else. So we like to operate in this domain, which is a bit broader, higher level, and it just cuts across different industries.
What I also like is that you do touch the big themes which are on everybody's mind, but you don't do the obvious stuff. Like my favorite example is right now there's COP26 in Glasgow, so every firm has their sustainability pieces up, and I'm like,
unless it's already existing.
Okay, fair, but also slightly boring. I don't know. Like you can have the 26th report on COP26 if you like, but maybe you don't have to do that.
Yeah, we don't have to do that. But the way we work on our themes is, of course, we work with the themes that the company is interested in. So we work backwards from there, and then we make our own themes that fit into those priorities. And then, of course, we get it approved. So sustainability, for instance, was one of those corporate themes, the issue that we put out. But again, the challenge is, how do you make it interesting? Because sustainability is something everyone is writing about. And you are sort of not the first one to the party, but what can you do different and how do you do it? So I think for us, this issue was a bit like that, and we managed to, pull it off rather well. I think we had, I don't know how specific you want to get, but we had our share of problems with it. We had an interview, which 5 minutes into the interview never worked out, but we had to turn it into something. We still did those 6 pages based on that interview with this.
Based on the 5 minutes? Are we talking about the penguin issue here, the green agenda? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, but we wrote that. If you read it again, we wrote that the interview. We started the interview, and then the person just walked off and said, basically not because he was not happy talking to us, but he's been talking about sustainability, and he says all the big things. He talks of his ideas, and nothing happens. So out of frustration that nothing happens, he said, I shouldn't be doing these interviews anymore. So at some level, it boils down to creativity. What do you do with something that didn't work out? And, so we have an almost steady group of writers we have grown to know well now. They are freelance, but we know what they're good for and how, what kind of story to give to whom. And we were lucky that it was this writer, and he picked it up, and he proposed a different idea based on the same person, and we said yes, make it fly. And so at some level it's a very, very creative enterprise, which is quite different from how a lot of other people approach it. Very creative. How do we make the next issue even better, different from the first one? How do we experiment? So in many ways, I think this magazine does not conform to some of the more traditional rules of magazine making. We're constantly looking at doing something different, and it sort of works.
So Flo, we've got to look at the clock because we all have like calls coming up in a few minutes.
Yeah, but that's been fascinating. Lots of good stuff. Very interesting. We, at the end of this, always ask the question, where can people find more about you or your work, or where would you like us to point people to?
For the magazine?
Or in general?
Whatever you prefer. You pick and choose. We can put a link to the magazine in the show notes for sure. I don't know if you have something else you're working on or you care about, which we should
Yeah.
call out?
This is the only thing I work on.
Okay. Nice. Thank you, Neelima, for this. This is very, very interesting. And thanks for sharing all these details. Truly compelling piece. And there you have it, people. Magazines still work if they're done if they're done well and with the right journalistic stance.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Ash. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for joining, Neelima. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.